Hey, hey, hey. Time for an out-of-this-world story from rSpace. Hell hath no fury like a husband scorned. Today on rSpace, he doesn't lash out in anger. He plans. Justice isn't just served. It's meticulously designed. She cheated and thought I'd pay alimony, so I proved her fair in court and took everything. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that you should never take responsibility for the actions of other people. If your wife cheats on you, I honestly think it is entirely their fault. Don't think about how your actions might have pushed them towards that, since they always had the opportunity to leave you if it was that bad. I did nothing wrong, but I blame myself for so long. But bad people do bad things. I think it is as simple as that. I'm saying all of that because of what I've gone through over the past several months, and now that it is all concluded, I think I have the best insight into the whole situation. I'll call my ex-wife Amy in this. She is 48 years old, and I am 50 years old now. We had been married for nearly 20 years when all of this happened, and you'd assume that a marriage was supposed to be airtight, but clearly that wasn't the case. I learned that the hard way. I know that there's a lot more radicalization of young men against this nonsense that women are capable of these days. It's a double-edged sword, since I think it is incredibly important for men to have the concept of women demystified. At the same time, I think it can very frequently go overboard. That's not what we are here to talk about, though. My point is that I was a lover boy when I met my wife, and I was a lover boy throughout the time that we were married. There was no reason not to be. My stance has always been that if you love someone, you should love them wholeheartedly, and you shouldn't hold back your love because of one rule or another. I did that. I know I'm blowing my own horn, but I know as I was an amazing husband to her and an amazing father to all of her children, who are now adults. However, that didn't seem to be sufficient for her. I built a roofing business from the ground up. I got into it when I was either 21 or 22, and that business is still here today, and it is doing amazing. Amy is a realtor. Over the years, we both became pretty solid at our jobs, which enabled us to live amazing lives and give our kids good living too. I supported her with her job on so many occasions, especially when I had clients doing roofing ahead of selling their houses. I'd put them into my favorite realtor, and because of the trust they had for me, most of them would end up using my wife to get things done. Her job ended up being what messed us up. Over the years of being married, we moved houses 3 times. There was the apartment we got married into, then there was the house we bought when we had built ourselves up financially. Most recently, considering our financial comfort, we got our retirement home in an upscale community, and it was all pretty nice. We were not and are not retired yet, and living in a spot that gave her the opportunity to network with some pretty solid personalities. She's got way more than a gig or two, thanks to high-profile people in my neighborhood. There's not much more roofing for me to get done there, but it was never meant to be a competition. I still had clients from other neighborhoods in the town, and the rare one from within ours. The problem started with a man called Randall. I had seen him before when I'd take walks through the neighborhood, but we never really had more than the basic, "How you doing?" and comments on the weather. We've been living in our current community for about 2 years now, and at a point, Amy told me that Randall was going to be moving to Europe, so he wanted to sell his house. Considering the pricing of most houses in the neighborhood, it was a good opportunity, and I was really happy for her. So she'd walk over to his place about twice a week to talk about progress and pricing and offers, though it didn't go on for more than 3 weeks before the house was sold, so I wasn't too suspicious about things. It was a really nice house. The pricing wasn't bad at all, and Amy knew people who would likely be interested. It seemed like her usual sale. Looking back now, though, I realize how often Amy would have a thing or two to take her out of the house after that. It wasn't a big concern to me, but saying that my suspicions weren't piqued would be a lie. I had been married to her long enough to know that something was definitely up. It was when I noticed that she started getting relatively defensive with her phone that cheating came to my mind for the first time. There was one night, soon after she got back home from a meeting with a client, I tried to get intimate with her, but she recoiled from me as if I was some random guy. That happened in the kitchen when she was pouring a glass of water, and immediately after that, it was almost like she ran upstairs and ran into the shower. Honestly, I have to have been stupid not to have suspected cheating at that point. I had no idea with who, but I knew things were off. That was not the marriage that I was used to. A lot of people go straight to checking phones, emails, social media, and all that, but honestly, I'm too old to be that effective at all of that. Plus, I'd rather not deal with it, considering how defensive she was being with her phone, so I hired a PI. I could afford it, and it would likely be a lot more in-depth than whatever I would be able to achieve by snooping. So, over the next several weeks, I waited and waited for the PI to finish up with all of his investigating. I made sure not to rush the man because I wasn't about to flush nearly 2 decades of love down the drain because of a misconception or an assumption. In the time that he was doing his investigation, I still noticed odd behavior from her, so it wasn't like it was some kind of phase that she was going through. There was something going on. Considering how close we were, I straight up asked her whether she was okay or if there was anything on her mind or anything that she was going through. But she gave the impression that there was nothing for me to worry about, so I just took her word for that. I knew I wasn't going to hear anything different, no matter how many times I decided to ask. Once the PI had finished his investigation, I went down to his office, and that's when I got the confirmation that I had been seeking. Amy had truly been cheating on me, and with none other than Randall. That part came to me as a shock because I had forgotten about Randall, so he wasn't someone that I found myself needing to worry about. Yet I had never told the PI his name, and he knew it. I knew he was good at his work, and I would have believed him based on his word alone. But when he slid some photos across the table to me, I knew it was over for my marriage. I didn't even have to go through them. It just felt like something in me broke. Needless to say, the photos were of her and Randall at various places in the city. One in a parking lot, one in a restaurant, one in the lobby of a hotel. There was one image in the dark that was hard to see in detail, but it looked like the two of them kissing in a car. There were several other photos of them in front of what I assumed was another house of Randall's, unless him moving to Europe was just a lie. I've never felt as insecure as I felt in that moment, because at that point, I started to think of every client that Amy had ever had, every boss she had complained about. All of a sudden, it just opened my eyes to the actual level of trust that was in the marriage. Compared to what I thought was there, Amy didn't find it hard to have an affair, and that means it was a trait of hers way before any of the Randall stuff happened. I knew that I was going to confront her as soon as I got home. There was no reason to me trying to play games with her. I had the evidence that I needed, and since I knew that things were going to the divorce, I was smart enough not to attempt to play my trump card well ahead of time. When I walked in the door, I asked her how Randall was without wasting a beat. She nearly jumped in her seat, and I knew she was done for. I asked again when she didn't say anything. She must have been very carefully contemplating which answer was going to do the least damage. That was when she started to cry. At that point, she still hadn't answered my question or said anything. Her first instinct was to unleash the waterworks. As much as she felt it might have gotten her some sympathy from me, that wasn't the case. It infuriated me even further. I yelled at her to stop crying, and I very rarely raised my voice, and that only worsened things. I let her know that she had no reason to cry when she was keeping a long-term affair alive, fully aware of the consequences of her behavior. When she refused to say anything that had any impact on the situation, I told her to head to the bedroom and pack her things. I let her know that she'd get the chance to pack the rest of her stuff during the week. The last thing I needed was to make the divorce process any more complicated than it needed to be. I'm too old to want to make it last long and hit her in 10 different ways. She got up, still weeping, and started heading to the bedroom, but she suddenly froze in place for about 10 seconds and then turned back around to me. This time, she was wiping her tears away and she seemed ready to say something in long last, only for the first words to come out of her mouth to be, "You know I'm going to milk you for alimony if you try this." She delivered that as if it was some kind of gotcha to me. Then she talked about how she was going to take half of everything that I had built and that I wasn't going to like that. Honestly, it felt like she was threatening me with consequences in the event that I divorced her, but I already knew that I was going to lose some things before I even started the process. I was just glad that there wasn't going to be any need to start fighting over custody. Thank goodness our children are grown. I told her that I knew that I would have to pay alimony and give her a split, and I told her that it was going to be well worth it to be rid of her. After I said that, she huffed off to her room, and about an hour later, she dragged a suitcase right out the door and drove off. She didn't spend a second to acknowledge me, not that I would have wanted her to. She came a few days later to pick up a few extra things. I don't think we said more than 2 words to one another. I was happy to have it that way. I had loved her for essentially half my life, but I am not ashamed to say that I hated her at that point. It didn't matter that she was the mother of my children, or that most of my happiest moments had been with her. For her to betray me like that, there was no reason to hold on to all that love. Things got complicated when I got a call from my oldest daughter. She sounded angry, asking why I kicked their mom out of the house and why I was accusing her of cheating. Apparently, her mother had told her that I had been acting paranoid and treating her like crap. That part made me furious because she was trying to turn our children against me, which was a ridiculous tactic but didn't necessarily surprise me. I had thought of letting our children know ahead of time, but I decided to just let them know when the divorce was finalized, and even then, I hadn't been planning to air her dirty laundry. But she brought it to that point, so I played it by her rules. Right there, I told my daughter that I wasn't being paranoid. I had evidence of the affair, and her mother hadn't denied it when I confronted her about it. I let her know that Amy was clearly trying to get their support ahead of me, so she cooked up a story. I sent some of the pictures I had gotten from the PI to our daughter so that she'd see the truth. I had been cheated on, I was getting divorced, and she was still trying to make me the bad guy in the eyes of my children. That last one was unforgivable, so I was going to return the favor. My daughter was quiet for a long time on the other end of the phone, but she eventually said she understood and that she was sorry for blowing up at me. Of course, I accepted that apology and then moved on. I wasn't going to hold it against my daughter that she sided with her mom. There was no big deal in that. Anyway, as we entered the courthouse, I remembered her threatening me with the alimony line, and that just made me more eager to take as much as I could from her. Now, the divorce process took a pretty long time, but I'll do my best to condense everything. It is needless to say that she did everything she could to delay me and frustrate me. I tried to get her to settle, but she refused, since her demands were 50% of our cumulative savings split down the middle, which would favor her more than me by quite a lot. She also wanted a pretty ridiculous amount of alimony, and she threw in the house to test her luck, it seems. When it became clear that she wasn't going to make things easy and we couldn't agree on a sum, I brought in the proof of the affair that I had. That was her first time seeing any of that, and her reaction was pretty funny in hindsight. She became so flustered. Obviously, she knew that I knew, but she must not have thought that there was any hard evidence to my knowledge of her affair. There it was, right in front of her. She still didn't make it easy, because while she tried to settle on a notably lower split, it was more than I felt like she deserved. Eventually, we realized that mediation wasn't going to do the job, so we had to go in front of a judge. My lawyer did an amazing job. The affair was the only reason why we split. We had a great marriage besides that. The split was entirely her fault because there was no reason for me to grin and bear it and continue to live with someone who had destroyed any trust that I had in them. The pictures alone made it a little hard to prove the affair, and the one photo of them kissing in the car was scrutinized pretty heavily by the judge. But hey, that one picture ended up being what swayed things. The judge determined the person in the image to be her, and he chose not to reward her for her infidelity. In terms of alimony, she got nothing. In terms of our assets, the judge deemed that while I had more in terms of net worth, she had enough of her own money for her not to put her hands on any of what I had owned. We both had very successful businesses. However, since I was going to be keeping the house, the major loss I made was almost like having to buy her out of the house, though it was much lower than the market value since the judge was still prioritizing her infidelity in all of his decisions. She bought her own car, so she kept that and I kept mine. Thankfully, the judge did not even consider my roofing company to be fair ground for a split. Ultimately, I had to part with some money, but I can live with that. The house stayed with me, most of my money stayed with me, and alimony didn't even get considered for that long. When we left the courthouse that day, I couldn't help but ask her about the alimony that she was so sure she was going to get. All she did was glare at me. That evening, I got on a group call with my kids and let them know that we had split. I felt no need to show them why, and I gave them a vague response. My kids are close though, so I'm sure that the oldest let them in on the reason. Divorce can tear your life apart, but in some situations you really shouldn't consider anything else. Life isn't worth living with someone that you'll never be able to trust again, so just walk out the door if you can. And that stays the same if you have young children. Arguable, but it is better for them to grow up in a broken home than an intact home without any love in it. Honestly, don't let this fool you into thinking that I was stoic throughout the entire thing. Amy broke my heart so badly, and I don't know if I'm going to be looking for love again, but I had to do what had to be done instead of dwelling on things. At least now, I can start to heal. Going from tears to cold calculation in seconds? That's not someone feeling genuine remorse. That's someone realizing they got caught and trying to land on their feet. The fact that her first instinct was to weaponize alimony and divorce settlements instead of apologizing just proves she knew what she was doing all along. Have you ever looked back and realized all the signs were there all along? Thank you for joining us today on rSpace. Be sure to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on our next video. Until next time.